even with all that happening, we're now seeing what the EPA is really about in the Gulf Coast. It couldn't be more evident, the farce that it is what's going on the Gulf Coast.
As you're saying, what they're showing is that it's purely political. They're saying, oh, well, we're saving the planet from global warming. Meanwhile, they're approving things that suit them. You know the one word that people, regardless of what issue it is, the one word or thing that drives people mad is hypocrisy. And that's what we're seeing here, the hypocrisy of it. And it's just so blatant the way they're doing it that it's really frightening.
You're an advisor to the International Climate Science Coalition and also to Friends of Science and the Frontier Center for Public Policy. You've been accused on Wikipedia and I think other SourceWatch of, quote, being funded by big oil, or you're on SourceWatch because you're, quote, a denier. What is the issue about funding and anything you've been involved in? What is the issue?
Okay, what the issue is, and by the way, I've never received a nickel from any energy company at all. And in fact, I joke about I wish I had received some from the oil companies because then I could afford their product. But of course, this is the idea of it's part of the ad hominem or personal attacks, that somehow if you're being paid by the oil companies, that's corrupt. But if you're being paid by government, that's not directed funding. Or if an environmental group is getting money from the oil companies, that's okay. So, for example, here in Canada, we've got the Suzuki Foundation, which is a big environmental group. They're receiving money from the oil companies. But somehow that's okay, but the intimation that I'm getting money from the oil companies damns everything I have to say. But to answer your question, it's 10 years ago now, a group of professional people, and by that I mean geologists, hydrologists, sedimentary petrology, you name it, we're looking at the science of climate change and climatology and realized that it was just very, very bad science, not only in terms of what they were saying, but the way that they were doing it. And so they contacted me, a fellow by the name of Albert Jacobs, and he said, we want to set up a group, and we want to call it Friends of Science, and we'd like some help. So I met with them in Calgary, and of course their problem was they were in Calgary and Alberta, and of course that in Canada automatically makes you suspect, because of course Alberta is the source of the tar sands and oil and so on. And so they said, look, how can we set this up to focus only on the science? We don't want to get involved in the politics at all. So I talked about what they needed to do, and I said, one of the things you must do is make sure that your funding is at arm's length and that you have nothing to do with it. And it's kept at arm's length. So they set up, through the University of Calgary, a funding process that anybody that submitted funds or gave them money, send it to this blind trust at the University of Calgary. And it subsequently turned out that one oil company had given $12,000 to this blind trust. And, of course, that was disclosed through the, which is fine. I have no problems with that. And then they said, oh, well, because of that money, that means that Tim Ball is paid by the oil companies. And then I traveled to Ottawa. We held a press conference on the day that the government was going to announce the Kyoto Protocol signing of it, to say, look, we're a bunch of climate scientists who have never been consulted by the Canadian government. We oppose this. And it was claimed that my expenses, which amounted to about $800 airfare and hotel, was paid by the oil company and Friends of Science. In fact, it wasn't at all. And so that then became the argument that you see now in SourceWatch, and it came, by the way, through that Suzuki Foundation and a thing called Dismog Blog, which they set up to smear people. And so that was used then to say that I'm totally discredited because I'm paid directly by the oil companies and I'm associated with the oil companies and so on. Nothing could be further from the truth.
It is what happens when you step out and you don't toe the line. I really appreciate you coming on the show. This has been like a 98-minute show right now. And I'd like to ask you, is there anything else you'd like to share with us?
Well, there's so much else I'd love to talk about the world, about the people in it. I mean, I mentioned Elizabeth I. I'd love to talk to you about William Bligh, Captain Bligh, who is probably one of the most maligned people in the world. He's unquestionably one of the great navigators of history. He took a trip in a 21-foot boat with 19 people in it, where they got 2 ounces of bread a day, and sailed 4,000 miles across the open ocean without any maps, without any navigational help at all, and landed within 12 miles of his destination on the Great Barrier Reef. And that's got completely forgotten because of the mutiny on the Bounty. And the mutiny on the Bounty would never have occurred if he had not been required to build a greenhouse to carry the breadfruit that he was taking to create a reliable food supply for people in different islands. And that greenhouse was built where the Marines would normally be housed. And the Marines were on board not only as a shore raiding party, but to prevent mutinies. But how does Hollywood deal with it? Well, Bligh is played by Charles Lawton in the most ugly presentation you could ever imagine. And Fletcher Christian, who was actually to blame for the whole thing, is played by Errol Flynn, Clark Gable, Mel Gibson. I mean, it's just incredible bias and rewriting of history. And of course, it's what we talked about earlier, about how you want to see things in a certain way, whether it's current information or historical information, and you do these stories to slant the whole story. But I'd love to talk more about that later on.
We'll definitely have you back on. Ladies and gentlemen, we have been talking to Dr. Tim Ball. He is a renowned environmental consultant and former climatology professor at the University of Winnipeg. He's also an advisor to the International Climate Science Coalition, Friends of Science, and the Frontier Center for Public Policy. He's also a writer on Canada Free Press at canadafreepress.com. And I really want to thank you for a wild and extensive journey on this broadcast. We've talked about so many subjects that I don't even know what to write about regarding what it is about. And I really want to thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, Kim. And it is the great it's a wandering around the great human adventure on this planet.
Indeed, it's a great honor.